So people believe in their own ideology. You could say that they believe in a false ideology. But they are pressed to dig down as deep as they possibly can with all the interference that the human body incorporates with the inner workings of the essence of who we really are. And it becomes confusing because people tend to have their own religions. They have their own belief systems that they adopt. In other words, the big psychological manipulation is that they understand, when I say they, who's running the program. And ultimately, we may have decided to get into these containers or these bodysuits from the beginning. But just to say that we can believe that love is the ultimate power, thereby the token or the expression of that love becomes a symbol that we are stuck with through complete and total manipulation, through guilt. And like the big thing is we have amnesia and we don't remember that, how we got here, what we ever were before, and even more so, the fact that the phenomenon to think and postulate this excites us, and we talk about it. We talk about synchronicity as if it's a really big deal instead of expecting the synchronicity all the time. It should be a bigger deal that synchronicities aren't taking place all the frickin' time. But you think that you're online, that you're on time, by getting the blessings from what can be only referred to as, you could call it the operating system, you could call it the default, or you could refer to it as the Black Lodge and the Matrix, where people have a job to do and they do the job. They just they know themselves because they know, like, as far as somebody who just wants power, and then all they have to do is identify which type of power, and then in their minds they have enough fortitude and imagination, creativity to think about what is the highest power by exhausting, by going through a scenario where they've exhausted one power. Like in someone's youth, they may think that they have power through sex, through thelema. And when you go through that, you realize the sex doesn't even exist at all. And you can even realize that by going through the process and then realizing how asinine it is, how it only identifies a certain portion of your life that you'll even be interested in sex in the first place. So really what you're talking about is excited fields, but they're aberrant excited fields. They're negatively charged excited fields. They're not continuous. It's on a feedback loop, much like pain, right? So when you can get past that and realize that the energetic excitement is definitely something that you can describe as a religious, let's say a religious practice, as opposed to cult practice. But when you get into cult practices, you're talking about something that's done ritualistically. Getting up and drinking a cup of coffee in the morning is a ritual. It's a religion. People fail to see how important it is that you get your cup of coffee if you're a coffee drinker. or that you have your treat after work, or that at this time the reason you worked so hard for 5 hours straight was to get that damn cigarette. It becomes a symbol. And so we're always tethering on to another time marker, and that propels us through time, right? So we're linking ourselves to another goal set. But we haven't ever gone, we've digressed and said, the cigarette is just going to get me through the day. And then we did that enough times, we do it over 40 or 50 years, and it changes you morphologically. It also alters the energetics of your soul, let's say. So instead of thinking it through, right, which people do, it's not to put people down. You know, how many times do you think somebody who smokes on average thinks about quitting? Probably several times a day. There's probably a number to that. And when things are good, they might. When things get hard, it becomes more challenging, right? And the most important thing is to realize that that symbol has nothing to do with smoking. It had something to do with a moment, a time, where most likely that avenue was introduced to you quite purposefully as an agent of control. But there would have been a backup. You know, instead of choosing the cigarettes, there's that reoccurring theme of divergent behavior. It could be sexual divergency, right? So it becomes an addiction. And even with your own chemistry, you have to work through the psychology of the process. And it's not a human psychology, you know? It's more etheric, for lack of a better. And so the psychology is about you being able to definitively answer that question to yourself. What is it that you want? Right? And even more so, that's an existential question. You don't ever have to answer anyone who asks you that. But what is your highest aspiration? And it's not, oh, when I'm motivated and when I'm goal setting, I'll think about my aspiration, but first I'm going to go to work. It's like, why do you even get up in the morning? You become a slave. Once people start to realize this, they realize themselves as a practitioner, right? And so you have people who wholeheartedly chose that power is what they want. And wherever they are, it's power that they want to have. Some people want to be in the back of the room, feeling like they're working the room, manipulating the room, sleight of hand, nobody can see them, right? Others want no bullshit at all. They just want that money. They want the things of kings. You know, all of them in their own right are working their own game. But the point is, it's a organization. It's an order. It's a culture. You could almost say it's a community, but it's a society. It's not a community, where you're opting for these figureheads, right, for an organization that's often named, not to separate an organization from sort of an organic matriculation compared to a Rotary Club. They're both organizations, right? And you become a player within that organization. That's why the Master Key talks about you being a theoretical abstract ego, which I brought up. If you do not take on the moniker of a specific role, well, that's an existential role. None of those things are real. And you didn't opt yourself into this. So when we look at the Sean Ryan show, which I've talked about, episode 66 thereabouts, there's a 3-part interview with Stephen Greer's 3 of his disclosure cronies, not in a derogatory way, comrades, and to say that these people all recognize this. They recognize it, but even more so, they're talking about these on-running programs as if the programs themselves imply a certain human trafficking is taking place. And so why is that? Is it for strange operations and experiments on human beings? Is that why it's being done? Is it to cultivate other planets through this clandestine organization, put people on Mars, put people on the moon? Who knows? But the fact remains of that's Occam's razor, which I don't think is an exact, but I think it's even better than a 60% average, as with is said to be with telepathic occurrence, unrefined telepathic occurrence. And to say that that disembodiment is definitely at the root of it, that these sort of self-replicating probes or UFOs seem to be part and parcel. And it's not a sideline. Like, you got to see that the CIA, all these covert globalist programs, the World Economic Forum, the complete and total wonderment that people like Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan had for the UFO, just to gain a little glimpse or a little bit of information. The fact that a lot of people, like almost listening to Robert Bigelow, have experienced these ships, right? And I postulated in the last video, the von Neumann self-replication, Alan Greenfield, to say that, and a lot of the stuff that Aleister Crowley talked about, to say that these, that you need to be on a life support system. Like the TS tether experiment in 1996 is a perfect example. You saw all these massive, would you call them craft? They almost look like camera specs, but there they were next to that 10-mile tether, right? And they acted like it snapped, and it was a failed experiment. But notice how the tether broke when there was this huge interest by these sort of monad-looking rudimentary creatures that all sort of looked like single-celled organisms. So when you look at that, and you don't separate that from anything that's being talked about, and you really do take on this paraUFOlogical, is that even a word, I guess, approach, and you look at it, it's like, what if these are living? That changes it all, right? Especially what if these are disembodied spirits, right? And they are bodiless at the moment, and these are like life support systems that they're flying around on. That changes things a lot, doesn't it? It shows a definite apprehension. It shows why they would be moving at such vast, 5,000-6,000 miles an hour upwards. Light speed, who knows? But maybe not light speed. Maybe they can't. They cannot reach an escape velocity, but they are outside the construct of our time. And again, I was postulating this in the last video. Maybe that's what we are. Maybe it's a huge effort to embody and to give bodies to the disincarnate, to say that a great war took place, cataclysms, and there the spiritual energy was left. And it had intelligence, it had knowledge that it lived with, and that the knowledge, there was a unique identity with each individual, and that the project became, how the fuck are we going to make bodies? Like we need bodies. We're just sort of floating around here in space, and even more so, there's a decay. We can't go anywhere. We're not omnipotent. We can't travel anywhere that we want to go. We can't. We're not omnipotent. We can't transcend space and time. So, and even more so, how do we cultivate new skills and integrate new skills if we're always stuck in this these extreme time dilations? Like, we need to slow things down. We need to create these generational patterns, right? And then it becomes the great work of, well, how do we keep these people in line who aren't sticking with our plan? And so a concept of God becomes something really, really evil. It's kind of like, do you really want to meet the thing that created the container that you're in right now? Do you really want to know the truth about what? And this is like, this seems so off topic, right, when you're hearing it the way that I'm saying. But everything from Dianetics, right, to Christianity, to even things that were alluded to with Chris Bledsoe and a dream that he supposedly had that his son was talking about, when I think it was Tim Taylor that he was talking to, was saying, you don't know how right on you are, when he's describing this dream that there was this huge catastrophe with these sort of almost hybrid ape-like creatures, right? And that what we're dealing with here is very close to Dianetics. It's very close to disembodied spiritual entities, right? That probably came upon a primitive beings that were maybe being cultivated by another running program or agenda. And so there was like sort of this break-off or war with these human containers, that there is value in being within the human containership, and then there are different doctrine of principles to follow, right? But these things are like all laws. They're not like first principles that are agreed upon through races. So you have these races of beings that are based on belief systems, are based on. So this is why it's so important that once you take on this highest belief system, I prefer to use faith, because beliefs can change, but faith shows a transient state of knowing that you ain't got all the answers, but you're following this intuitive a priori, if you will. So, foreknowledge, where it doesn't have to be defined, and there's no way that it could be defined. So you will realize yourself, you will realize the work, and then you will hear the voice or the voices. And whether or not you listen to those voices, you'll know whether or not you're being tested by a so-called dark side or a light side. And there is a division. It's, as ridiculous as it seems, good and bad, light and dark kind of thing, Coke, Pepsi. It's almost like, are they indoctrinating you into a duality and to think in a dualistic sense? Or are they making it easier for you and saying, look, you might as well start thinking in dualities because things are very extreme. And when you don't come down to this, like, in other words, the choice is there whether you want to admit it or not. And if you aren't admitting it, that you fall on one side or the other, the right-left paradigm, That if you are not on one side, then you are more than likely on the other. And then to ask the right questions, or the act of doing, right, shows an allegiance or an alliance with the action of a specific potential. They are always action potentials. So neutralities can be earned at that point when you realize the aspects of the paradigm that you exist and are living in. And then I believe that once you have made that choice, you are aligning with the ultimate choices that you've always made and always will make, and it just reaffirms that. And that this is, in a big way, a re-scrambling where a lot of people, a lot of entities, a lot of beings had no idea why they fell on one side or the other. In other words, they lived a life, possibly through many incarnations, and never questioned whether or not what they were doing and what their belief system was what they would choose. And you see, if there's one thing that we have, it's a myriad of choices that are starting to reduce into one actionable potential. So do you have to go turn in a resume for the Black Lodge? Do you have to go turn in a resume for the contrary to that? You know, like the Black Lodge is definitely on the left-hand path. So when you get beyond the whole white lighter thing, the love bombing, and, you know, bullshitters, and there's a lot of them, the new religion, the new televangelists preaching a sort of UFOlogical, technological religion, emergent religion, and where science and religion you will not be able to distinguish between the two. And the total reliance, as opposed to self-reliance on mechanical measures or mechanical means. So then you have the right-hand path. It becomes clear, you know? And so there are those practitioners who have developed on both sides to where they become effulgent beings, if you will, and they live not as outliers, but every move and every choice at that time becomes extremely important, you know, to where you realize there are no just frivolous actions. You know, there is nothing superfluous. Everything matters very much so. It matters much further beyond matter, and that matter makes up what this so-called spiritual or essence is, and what it's doing, what it's becoming, and what it has become, you know? And so by actionable deed, you will become one or the other. And that's the time that we're in, where you have to choose what you're going to be. And by trying to be that third, that the totality of developing both, you are signing yourself up for something that, like most anybody, you're gonna think much bigger and broader than perhaps your capacity is. But even more so, it is your destiny not to just simply relent to one side or the other, knowing that ultimately in extremism, to choose one side or the other, it is a balance. There's a time of war, there's a time to use brutality. And in that, it's like, is it your choice to live? you die enough times and you go through enough lifetimes to the point where eventually you will kill. And then finally you will realize the moment of expression through aggression that somebody that you thought in many lifetimes ago was completely primitive or off hinge, and whereas they might be developing into someone that was much like you were. And there's this sort of balance, and you could almost look at it like a sort of evening out with thermodynamics, where once the dust settles, it becomes extremely evident and clear of exactly where you were always supposed to be sitting all along, where in the octonal harmonic tone of everything resonates with you and what you undeniably were all along.